Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the IPM Diaries, episode 5. First and foremost, I would like to thank all of you for the encouraging response that we have been getting for this initiative. And thank you so much for the same. And we also get suggestions on interesting topics, which we will be taking up in the near future. So, as India progresses to become a developed nation in the near future, infrastructure, education, access to healthcare are the three important pillars that will aid the country to reach this milestone. In this episode, we touch about how big and small players have played a significant role in strengthening the Indian pharma market. We will be looking into the interesting journey of the Goliaths, who were the Davids a few decades back and today are the face of the country in the global pharma arena. The Davids, who may have entered the branded generics market segment a little later, but are rapidly becoming an integral part of the Indian pharma market growth story. So today, what I have done is for these IPM diaries, we have broken this entire thing into two sections because we always look at Indian pharma market in isolation. We look at, these are the big players, these are the big brands, but we thought about connecting this whole thing to the bigger picture of the country's growth. So in section 1, at a micro level, we will look at what India needs to be a developed nation by 2047, the gap to be filled, the challenges and opportunities, and how pharma sector fits into the big picture. In section 2, we will be doing a little more analysis on the Davids and the Goliaths, the inspirational journey of the Goliaths, and the rapid growth of the aspirational Davids. So the first part, so if the country has to become a developed nation by 2047, it has to accomplish these goals to become that. One is the GDP. The current GDP, which is 3.3 trillion, it has to move to close to 30 trillion, which is a multiplier effect of almost 9x. The per capita income has to move from 2000 USD to almost 19,000 USD, which is a multiplier of around 8x. Also, the country needs to consistently grow at 7 to 10% in the next 20 to 30 years to avoid this middle income trap. What do we mean by middle income trap? Is a situation where the country has reached a middle income status and is unable to progress to the higher income status. This can lead to economic stagnation, social inequality, and loss of global competitiveness. Also, the country's working age population is projected to be around 112 crores, and investments in education, skill development, and employment generation are needed to fully realize the potential of this young population. Quality education is extremely important, vocational training, digital training become important so that we create a population of younger generation which is employable. Also, the country needs a multifaceted approach to reduce poverty, economic growth, social security, infrastructure, development and empowerment of women and marginalized groups becomes very important. Also, the country must continue investing in infrastructure, modernizing roads, railways, digital networks, because connectivity is the key to progress. As far as the healthcare expenditure is concerned, the current expenditure, which is less than 2% of the GDP, has to move to 3% or more if healthcare access is to be made available at a very good rate to majority of the population. Now, when we talk about the country, the country needs to consistently grow at a rate of 7 to 10%. We usually restrict ourselves to the growth of the Indian pharma market. But besides pharmaceutical industry, there are many more industries. There is IT industry, textile industry, chemical substances, FMCG, farming, petrochemicals, many more. In fact, if the country has to grow by 7 to 10%, then all these industries have to grow at the same rate because so that collectively the country grows at this rate. While we are always abreast about the pharma industry growth because we look at it on a monthly basis, let us look at how the industries are looking, other industries, what is their growth rate. And then we understand the challenge that we face because over a period of time, all the industries have become big. At a higher base, growing at 7 to 10% is not easy. If you see amongst all these industries, still the industries which are growing at a relatively bigger speed or bigger space would be the pharma industry, the chemicals, the FMCG. Education is growing at a very fast pace. Healthcare, which is excluding pharma, biotechnology, e-commerce, these are the budding industries which are growing very fast. But barring a few industries, many other industries, the growth is relatively slow because their base is relatively higher. And maintaining this base is going to be a challenge unless and until we do some corrective, not corrective, some major initiatives are taken. Now let us look at within this whole picture, where does pharma industry stand and does the picture for pharma industry look very encouraging in this picture? Now what I have done is, I'll go a little slowly on these slides because we have looked at the GDP of the country versus the size of the pharma industry. Now we will see the numbers of GDP. We get in different references, we get two different numbers. Some places they talk about the number as 3.7 trillion, and some places we talk about 3.3 trillion. Now, in this presentation, I have considered this number because this is the real GDP number, which is adjusted to the country's inflation. So, through this presentation, we have used this number, whether I'm looking at GDP of our country or GDP of other nations. Now, if you look at the size of pharma industry and the GDP, over here, the GDP value for the country was around 21 lakh crore, which has moved to around 283 lakh crore, which talks about a 24-year CAGR of close to 12%. Also, if I were to look at multiplier, it has multiplied by around 13 times. In contrast, if I were to look at the pharma industry from 5,000 crores, it has moved to around 2.2 lakh crores, a CAGR of around 18%, and a multiplier of around 45, which means that pharma industry is definitely growing rapidly and in line with the company's growth, with the country's growth requirements. Now, if I look at the pharma industry's contribution to the GDP, in 2000 it was just 0.2%. Today it has actually become close to 0.8%. So with this high growth GDP for the country, if our contribution has increased significantly, so when I'm talking about a number of 0.8, I talk about a number of approximately 1%. The entire picture is quite encouraging. However, I also need to benchmark myself with the other big industries and how much do those industries contribute to the country's GDP. So if I look at pharma, the contribution is around 1%, whereas there are other industries like petrochemicals which contribute to 6%, construction 9%, mining 2%, IT 7%, manufacturing, which is the biggest industry, contributes to around 16 to 17% of the country's GDP. This macro picture is important. First is to understand how the pharma industry is becoming very important for the country, and also benchmarking other industries and looking at where the pharma industry stands in comparison to the other industries. Now we also try to look at benchmarking ourselves with other nations. So today India comes at the fourth position, the fourth largest economy in the world. Actually, we have bypassed UK now. So again, over here in these numbers, I have taken the real GDP of all nations. If I were to take the nominal GDP, the number over here would have been 30. It is 23 because we have considered the inflation of the country. So what we have looked at, the GDP of different nations, the top four nations, and their percent of GDP spent on healthcare and the population. Okay. So if you look at the percent of GDP spent on healthcare for US is almost 17 to 18%. This also indirectly talks about the quality of life that people enjoy in those countries because healthcare is taken care of very well. In contrast, if you look at a country like China, this GDP is almost a little slightly more than half of what it is in for US. In Japan is close to 8.3%, whereas India, our percent contribution is less than 2%. The starking factor also that needs to be seen is if I were to divide it with the population, it also tells me that the amount spent per capita on health in India is very, very, very minuscule. In contrast, if I were to look at a country for like China, where the GDP is almost 6 times that of India, and the spent on GDP is more than 3 times than what India does. Also, if in terms of population, we are at par. Now, how does the progression of India's GDP look in the next 4 to 5 years? So in 2026, it is expected to reach 4.7, and in 2031, it is expected to be somewhere between 7 to 10. Also, as far as the spend of government is concerned on healthcare, we expect it to be around 2.5% of GDP in 2026 and around 3.1% in 2031. while the population keeps on growing steadily, the encouraging factor is the amount of the GDP spent on healthcare would gradually increase. Now, how does it look in terms of absolute numbers? Okay, now this calculation I have done in USD only to keep things relatively simple. So this is the GDP of the country, 3.3 trillion moving to 4.7 to 7.7 to 10. Now, of this, the percent that will be spent on healthcare, it moves from 1.9% to 2.5% to 3.1%. So today, while the value is close to 64 billion USD, it will be moving to around 118 billion by next year and around between 217 to 310 billion USD in 2031. So when I'm talking about the multiplier effect on the amount planned to be spent, it actually is almost doubling over what we have today and becoming close to 3 to 5 times of what we have today by 2031. Now, different players within the healthcare sector play an important role to ensure benefits of the expanded healthcare reaches the right beneficiaries. Now, how does the Indian sector also fit in the bigger picture in terms of the opportunities, the growth, etc.? Now, if I were to look at the number of drug companies which are there in the country today, we have close to 3,000 drug companies which are marketing branded formulations within the country. There are close to 10,500 manufacturing units. Biotech, which is catching up very fast, we see that there are close to 154 established biotech companies in the country, and the biotech startups have actually started increasing at a rapid pace. They have increased from close to 50 in 2010 to over 6,000 today. And there are certain hubs or states or geographies within the country which can be termed as the biotech clusters because maximum activity in terms of biotechnology is happening here: Maharashtra, Karnataka, West Bengal, and Haryana. Also, when it comes to strategic alliances in the pharma industry between Jan 19 to Feb 24, there are close to 32 deals have happened for new molecular entities to enter India, just co-marketing that has happened. Also, bold acquisitions by Indian pharma companies, especially the majors, to strengthen access to super specialty. The recent example is Sun Pharma's acquisition of Checkpoint Therapeutics to bring in access to advanced skin care treatment. Also, Indian companies are spending a lot in R&D for developing their own molecules. The saroglitazar, which has been developed by Zydus, is an excellent example. Also, as the sector becomes big, as the sector looks at growing at a very fast pace, it also attracts a lot of private investments. Since healthcare is something which is being talked about quite regularly, the population of the country becomes younger, lifestyle diseases become big. So this is a strong opportunity that many healthcare entities or investors who want to invest in healthcare, they look into. So if you look at India's healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, the amount of investments that have happened, they are close to around 2.6 lakh crore between the period 2022 and 24. Now, this is not restricted only to pharma. This is restricted to all the areas which touch upon the healthcare industry. It may be pharma, non-pharma, it may be certain greenfield projects, brownfield projects. It may also be amount which gets given by the private equity players to the pharma companies for acquiring companies, acquiring brands, etc. Also, last but not the least, pharma industry is one of the strongest employers for R&D scientists, medical reps, pharmacy graduates, and many more allied roles. So despite a sluggish population growth, now this is one slide which we had used in our curtain raiser section of IPM Diaries, wherein we had looked at the population growth. This orange line talks about how the population growth has tapered in the last few years. Whereas in contrast to this tapering of the population, we see the pharma industry continues to grow well. The growth of the pharma industry has not tapered down, but it has continues to grow and show a robust growth. Some of the key areas impacting this growth are the government policies for access to healthcare, increase in the incidences of non-communicable and lifestyle diseases, the treatment for which is pretty expensive. And many places now biosimilars are catching up, wherein the dosage and duration of treatment is very convenient. You don't have frequent doses, but it's a very expensive therapy. Younger population with disposable income and better awareness of global treatments available for the disease conditions and willingness to take benefit of those medications available. Now coming to the second section. Second section, we come to the Indian pharma sector where we do our normal analysis and look at how the different big and small players have made it big or are propelling the growth of the Indian pharma industry. It was important for me to, put a little background of India in the bigger of pharma industry in the bigger picture of India growth story, so that we can align the next analysis to how what is the important role played by many players. Now when we talk about Davids and Goliaths, I will not be discussing about the David and Goliath story. All of us are aware of the same, but Goliath is something. When we talk about Goliath, we see somebody big, major, powerful. And when we talk about David, we think about somebody who is very small, meek. Okay. So when we talk about Goliath players in the pharma industry, we talk about corporates with higher turnover, having mega brands which contribute majorly to the Indian pharma market, strong across all the zones, pan India presence, pan therapy presence, present in across all the therapy areas. And when we talk about Davids, we talk about relatively smaller players, minor contributors to the Indian pharma market. They are strong across limited zones or not strong at all across zones, and they are present in a limited therapies. Now, this is our perception when we talk about Davids. So in this study, what we did is we looked at the Goliaths as companies which are ranking among the top 50 companies. And when we talk about Davids, we look at corporates which are beyond top 50 companies. So what we did is, in this episode, we look at these numbers in a slightly different way. Okay. So the top players, they continue to dominate the Indian pharma market. Okay. So we looked at which are the top 10 players and how much do they contribute to the Indian pharma market. What we have seen is that the top 10 players, they contribute to close to 45% of the Indian pharma market. And the top 50 players, they contribute to around 85% of the Indian pharma market. Now, this is the breakup. If I were to see, this is how the breakup looks in terms of ranking. You see that almost 46%, 45 to 46% comes over here. Whereas the other players, which are 51 and above, they contribute to over 16% of the IPM. Now, for this data, this analysis, we have used Pharma Track data, where we capture close to 1,000 manufacturing, marketing companies. However, in my earlier slides, we have discussed that there are close to 3,000 marketing companies or companies which are marketing generics, branded generics in the, or innovator formulations in the country. So these collectively are having a very less contribution. Then we looked at the domination. Out of this entire market, how much is dominated by the Indian companies and how much is dominated by the MNCs? What we see is predominantly in the overall Indian pharma market, 85% of the contribution comes from Indian companies and 15% is from the MNCs. Now, probably 2 decades back, when we used to look at this picture, it was 75-25. So gradually, Indian pharma companies have started becoming big and MNCs have started shrinking. Now, there is a class of MNCs which is still little bigger, still little stronger. These are typically the MNCs which have their innovator molecules or they are into that high-end sectors within the country, within the pharma segment. For example, some companies like Novo Nordisk or many of the cardio-diabetic companies which brought in their innovator molecules in the country and made it big through partnerships. So they still dominate. If I were to look at amongst the top 50 companies, how many are in the Indian and MNC breakup bracket? We see that among the top 10, we have one MNC Abbott. 11 to 20, we have two MNCs. 21 to 30, two MNCs. 31 to 42 MNCs. And the major chunk of MNCs lies over here between 41 to 50. So over here, if you see, the MNC contribution is relatively higher in this 41 to 50. Now, if you see, typically these are the companies which have their innovator molecules and mostly in the super specialty or specialty space of the Indian pharma market. Now, based on our conventional assumption of the Goliaths. So first, the first section, we will be looking at the inspirational journey of a few Goliaths. So what we have done is we have analyzed around 6 companies and looked at their journey. We have now these companies are there in the pharma market for almost 30 to 40 to almost 50 years. Some of them are there for almost 50 years. So we have not looked at what happened in each year, but we have broken down their journey into decades. So we looked at how did the company progress in those decades, because usually it takes 1 decade for a company to move from one stage of growth to another stage. So these are the companies we have taken, and now there is the whatever we are showing in the consecutive slides. It is not that that is the only thing that the companies have done, but whatever was available for us to check from public domain, and also do a little more desk research, do a little more discussions, and also look at our data. So whatever was available, we have put in. It is possible that there may be certain events which the company has gone through but are not reported in this report. So if I look at Mankind Pharma, it is a number 3 company in the Indian pharma market. Market share of close to 5.6% and a turnover of around 12,600 crores. The company is around for almost 3 decades now. Now, if I were to break up its journey in the last 3 decades, the company started operations in 1995 with focus on affordable medications in the Indian market. So if people recall, Mankind to start with was considered to be a rural company with medicines or generics at a very, very, very affordable rate. But gradually, it moved from the acute segment to the chronic segment with launch of its brands Amloca and Glimistar. Also established its first manufacturing facility in Himachal Pradesh. Later on, the company moved into the OTC segment with launch of Manforce. Prega News was launched. It also acquired certain companies like Magnet Labs to enter the CNS segment. Also, certain brands were acquired. So, brand acquisition, company acquisition also started in the second decade of its existence. It also expanded internationally in the second decade and having its subsidiaries in US and Singapore. And the recent decade, which is 2016 to 2025, it actually diversified into Pathkind Labs. It also entered the Ayurvedic business, the pet care business. Also, if you look at it actually launched its Dydroboon, which is India's first dydrogesterone. It acquired certain brands from certain companies, Combiale and Daffy from DRL. It came up with its IPO in this decade. And also the biggest acquisition which has been done is the recent acquisition of Bharat Serums. So after a particular point, growing organically becomes little difficult. So this company has actually, in a very good way, tried to diversify its presence beyond pharma, but staying in the healthcare industry and also acquiring relevant companies, relevant brands to make its presence strong in the pharma market. Then we come to Intas. The company is ranked 6th in the Indian pharma market, has a market share of around 3.8% and a turnover of 8,500 crores, almost 8,500 crores. The company is around for almost 4 decades now. Founded in 1984, focused on manufacturing of formulations for various therapeutic areas. Gradually diversified, and if you look at the therapies in which it started to strengthen itself, it was more on the chronic therapies. It started its export business, established its US FDA manufacturing facilities. And then in the third decade, it has acquired the API facility of Ankleshwar Biotech. It also focused or entered into the biosimilars market, established Intas Biopharmaceuticals with focus on biosimilars and monoclonal antibodies. It expanded its presence in Europe by acquiring Aristo Pharma. Now, this is not the Indian Aristo Pharma, it is a UK-based company. It acquired Leica Labs for enhancing its domestic presence in the injectables and the oral dosage capabilities. It also introduced key biosimilars in oncology segment. I will not go through all, but then it gives us a gist of how the different companies have made it big. When we talk about the company being a Goliath, they have put in lot decades and decades of experience, decades and decades of experimentation, perseverance, and hard work has gone in to reach to that level. Also, if you see in this, it has expanded its injectable portfolio. Over here, if you see there, you will see a lot of acquisitions that have happened in the last decade. Uh, I will not read all the points, but if I were to look at the summary of the last decade, a lot of acquisitions, a lot of entries into the foreign markets, and also entry in a good amount of critical care business, super specialty business. Coming to the next company, McLeod's, which is at a rank 11th, market share 3%, and a turnover of close to 6,700 crores. The company is there for almost 4 decades, founded in 1986, focusing on providing quality medicines and affordable medicines. It established a bioequivalence study center to conduct studies for product registration with various regulatory authorities. It sorry. It also collaborated with TB Alliance to introduce the child-friendly formulations of first-line TB medicines, supplying close to 1.8 million treatment courses to 125 countries since its launch. And in the recent decade, it has expanded its presence to South Africa's private pharma sector, launching 41 products since November 22. It has also launched Pretomanid, which becomes the second manufacturer to introduce this essential component of WHO recommendation treatment regimen for drug resistance tuberculosis. Coming to MCure, now, over for MCure as a company, we have experience. The company has an experience of close to 5 decades in the country. While the initial 2 decades were relatively slow for this company, action picked up from decade three. The initial first 2 decades were just having operational excellence or strengthening its normal formulations business. But then in decade three, Zuventus was formed. Geneva Biopharmaceuticals for biopharma R&D was established. Also, a lot of solid facilities were developed in Hinjewadi. The company also got its US FDA registered plans for business to ensure that they can expand into the global markets. Also, looking at decade four for this company, if you see, they acquired worldwide rights for Carmestin, a chemotherapy agent. Then it acquired Tilomed Labs, Markan Pharma, Bharadwaj Pharma. So a lot of acquisitions happened in decade four. And it also established a manufacturing facility in Bangalore through Zuventus Healthcare and enhanced its production capacity. Also, a commencement of Sanand Injectables facility and US FDA approval for Sanand facility has happened in decade four. This also ensured approval for tenecteplase for emergency stroke care. So gradually, the company started moving from its acute business to strengthening its chronic business, not just in the domestic market, but also the global market. Many trials were initiated in this decade for vaccines, acquired Mantra Pharma for further expanding its footprint into Canada. IPO was launched in this decade, the latest decades. Also, recently, the company has launched MQTix with focus on the derma portfolio. There is an agreement with Gilead Life Sciences to manufacture and globally supply drugs for HIV treatment. And the recent acquisition was MCure acquired Sanofi India's cardiac portfolio to strengthen its cardiac portfolio. Coming to Laranon, a relatively latest company present for last 2 decades. Over here, the journey looks to be little different, though to a great extent there are similarities. But then the company was founded in 2007 with focus on manufacturing and making branded generic formulations, particularly nephrology. While the earlier companies, we see that they have entered the generics business, or not generics, the acute business, uh, which is more of, mass market business, or, something which is a GPCP business. They started from that, and gradually the other companies became super specialty companies. Whereas for La Renon, it was initially they started with as a nephro company itself. And when you start as a super specialty company, you really require a lot of investments. So they require, actually in decade one, they secured a good investments from Sequoia Capital. Also, if you look in the over a period of time, as the company started itself as a super specialty company, there were a lot of investments which happened from private equity. As you had seen, we had seen in our earlier slides that private equity investments worth 2.6 lakh crores have happened in the Indian pharma market from 2022 to 24. And when you try to establish your company in the super specialty segment, a lot of investments need to happen in R&D, production, also, having that type of doctor base, patient base. So Laranon has actually used this private equity to make it big. Coming to Hetero Healthcare, again, this company we see 4 decades of existence. Founded in 1993, focusing on the development and manufacture of active pharmaceutical ingredients and generic formulations. It supplied generic oseltamivir under the name Fluwir during the swine flu outbreak, delivering close to 10 million doses to the Indian government and shipping about 80 to 60 million doses, 80 million doses to over 60 countries. Also, if you see over here, they have actually launched a good number of brands in the antiviral segment, in the vaccine segment, and a lot of acquisitions, or a few acquisitions of manufacturing plants to expand the presence in the biologics. So this company, though it started as a generic player providing affordable formulations, gradually has moved to a player which can actually operate in the biotechnology segment and can provide affordable options in that segment as well. The latest decade has seen they have introduced Hetros, a breakthrough brand combating iron deficiency anemia, and they have launched TNK Plays, which is the tenecteplase injection, expanding its presence in the cardiovascular production. Now, if you see, this company also, similar to the other companies, started with affordable acute therapies, but gradually expanded to the chronic therapies. So, net, if I were to look at the journey of the few Goliaths over decades, and if I were to, even talk about many more Goliaths, we would see similar journeys. First, they started with bulk drugs and process tweaked patented products at affordable price, because at that point of time in the initial years we had process patent and not product patent. Later on, when product patent came in, they started focusing on R&D. They developed their own US FDA approved plants so that the quality, they are known for quality globally. They focused on, after a particular level, where, organic growth was difficult to happen or not very easy to happen. They focused on inorganic growth, where they looked at mergers, acquisitions, partnerships. Gradually moved into the gradually they became globally dominant through their branded generics business, focused on biosimilars, and after a particular time, private equity participation was important to ensure that they get the right funds for their further growth, exponential growth. Now, this was about a journey of few Goliaths, where, they became very strong, but then it took a good number of decades to reach a level where they are. Now, besides the turnover of the company, brands create a strong identity and association for the top of the mind recall for any company. For example, there are several brands in the Indian pharma market that have been used for generations, and consumers associate more with the brands than the company. A few brands to name, we have Augmentin, Leu 52, Dexorange, Electral, Bicosules, Shelcal. So, if I ask a consumer from which company the brand is, probably they may take time to recall. But everybody knows these brands. For example, when I'm exhausted or I'm having suffering from diarrhea, I will take Electral. Leu 52, I can associate with jaundice. Dexorange with iron deficiency. Shelcal for my bones. Bicosules multivitamins. So I may not recall the company, but I recall these brands. And that's the reason why these strong brands actually help the companies to have a stronger presence. In fact, Shellcal, a company, the brand from Elder, has changed hands from Elder to Torrent. But today, for me, I do not associate Shellcal to a great extent with a company. For me, Shellcal is calcium. Companies adopt several strategies using legacy brands. They strengthen their presence in the therapy. They launch several brands with relevant molecular combinations under the umbrella brand, or sometimes just stick to the same core brand. All the strategies stay in line with the company's long term vision, because as a strategy the company does not want to expand into many brands. That is fine as long as they are creating strong brands. Why I discuss about these strong brands is, as we move ahead we'll see what is the importance of big brands for the Indian pharma market. Now, over here, we'll go through this slide a little slowly. What I have done is I have bifurcated the brands, the number of brands as per the turnover. So, in the Indian pharma market, there are close to 15 brands with a turnover of greater than 500 crores. 14 brands with a turnover of between 400 to 500. 29 brands between 300 to 400. So net, there are close to 14,999, or I will just round it off as 15,000 brands, which are having a turnover of close to 1 crore, of greater than or equal to 1 crore. I have not looked at other brands because it will be too many brands. But then, with a very smaller value. But then if you see in terms of absolute percentage contribution to this number, 15 brands are just 0.1% of 15,000. 14 brands is just 0.1% of this. However, it is very important to see that, how much are these brands contributing to the Indian pharma market. Also, before I go to the contribution piece, since I've been in this industry for a very long time, almost 2 decades back, when we used to talk about a mega brand, how do you define a mega brand? We used to say that a brand with a turnover of close to 50 crore and above is considered as a mega brand. I think in the last 2 decades, we have changed the benchmark altogether. 50 crore is bare minimum that a brand should reach to be considered as a big brand, a successful brand. And we already have brands with a turnover of 800 crores and above, 700 crores and above. So, the definition itself has changed in the last 2 decades. Okay, now we go back to what we were discussing. How are these brands important? Over here in this table, we have taken the IPM value and the value of these 15 brands. How much are these 15 brands contributing to the Indian pharma market? So these 15 brands, they contribute to almost 4% to the Indian pharma market. 14 brands with a turnover of close to collective turnover of close to 6,000 crores contribute to close to 3% of the Indian pharma market. So if I were to look only this segment, which is brands with between turnover of 50 crore to 500 crore, we will see that 5%, this total comes to approximately 5%, okay? And this total comes to approximately 50%. So in terms absolute numbers, 5% of the brands, they contribute to close to 50% of the Indian pharma market. So that is the significance and importance of having a strong brand. So the Davids and Goliaths collectively, they have taken a lot of efforts to building such brands. So we have a typical understanding and perception that all the big brands will be coming from big companies only. That may not be the case. So what we have done is we have done a further analysis. We try to look at where do these brands lie. We feel that because the Goliaths are big companies, all the big brands may be coming from these companies only. So what we have done, let me go again very slowly over here. So these are the company ranks, the rank between 1 to 10, contributing to close to 56% of the IPM. And this is the turnover range. The smallest company in this band would be around 6,800 and the biggest company would be 18,000. And how many brands of these 15 are from this company? Okay. Similarly, rank 11 to 20, contributing to 21% of the Indian pharma market. 4 brands from this are in the turnover range of around 500 crore and above. However, if you see over here, we also have slightly smaller companies with relatively lesser turnover also having strong brands over here. As the size of the brands decreases, their contribution from smaller companies also increases. But we will focus a little more on the smaller companies and how many companies or, are these companies giving us brands with 50 crore and above. So if you see in this section, we have good number 51 plus 23. So almost 75 brands which are 50 crore and above have come or have been contributed to the Indian pharma market by relatively smaller players. At the same time, a good chunk of mega brands, a significant chunk of mega brands are contributed by the big players in the market. Now, when we talk about just numbers, one brand, two brand, three brand, probably it doesn't give us the contribution perspective. So we have worked on a percentage. Now, how do I arrive at this percentage? Now, 53 would be 115 divided by 215. So, percent over the base. So, if I were to look at 11% of the brands which are in having a turnover between 100 to 200 crores, which turns out to around 23 brands. It comes from companies with turnover or companies with turnover less than 700 crores. Almost 51 brands, which is 9% of the brands falling in the 50 to 100 crore turnover, they come from these smaller companies. So if you see in terms of percentage, 3%, 5%, 11%, 9%, a significant chunk of high value brands are also coming from the smaller companies whom we today call Davids, because in absolute turnover, they are relatively small companies. Now we try to look at some examples of brands from these smaller companies. So over here, we have we are talking about Goliath brands from David companies. So I would consider for this analysis 50 crore and above brands as big brands, from especially when we are looking at smaller companies. So if you look at this table, what I've done is here, this is the value of the company, this is the value of the brand, and this is the contribution of the brand to the company. So in terms of absolute turnover, if you see the turnover of majority of these companies or all these companies is between 400 to 600 crores. But then Syneris from Centaur, almost 40% contribution to Centaur. Dynapar AQ, Dynapar QPS from Troika. RPG Life Sciences has some three brands which are 50 crores and plus and are strong players within the Indian pharma market. Manish Pharma, Doxinet. Walter Bushnell has three brands, Drotin, Urispas, Drotin M. Integrace. Now this company is not a very old company, but it's a new company, but then they have acquired portfolios of some other companies. Similarly, we have MSN, Tapal brand from MSN, then Bet brand. Then tablets, from tablets, we have Bifilac. Alpert David, we have Placentrix and Alamin. East India, we have Entropinol, Pyrogesic, Tonoferon. Kepler, we have Bifolate, Mocktail. Medbenor Organics, we have Keto brand. So if you look at these brands, the companies may not be very significant companies in terms of when we talk about, the top players of the Indian pharma companies. But then if you look at the brands are very significant brands in the respective therapy areas where they are present. Also, we look at certain places like Modi Mundi Pharma, one brand, a strong brand. Geno Pharma, Saipon is a brand which like, we talked about Electrol, where I may not connected directly with the company, but then I know the brand very well. Saipon is one such brand. Pepanil from Aurobindo, D-Protein MMS from British Biologicals. ICPA, the stomatologicals company, focusing completely on stomatologicals. Thermosil and Hexidin, two strong brands. The company is in existence for several years now, but then it is okay because okay for them as they focus only on that particular segment. Two players from East Zone, Strassenberg and Stadmed, extremely local players, but then in their respective therapies of interest, they have built very strong brands which are at a leadership position in those therapies. We also look at, so basically from this slide, what we were trying to derive is, while the companies may be smaller, but then the smaller companies have really given good brands, established brands, and legacy brands to the Indian pharma market. Also, when we look at the 3-year CAGR, we looked at the 3-year CAGR of the market. The reason is we tried to take away the COVID impact of the year 21 and 22, and we kept the last 3 years, which would be completely COVID-free impact. And we looked at the 3-year CAGR of the Indian pharma market, and amongst all the players, how are the different, which are the companies which are actually at par or better than the 3-year CAGR. So amongst the top 10 players, we have close to 7 players which have exceeded the CAGR of the Indian pharma sector. Now, it is important that the top players they exceed the CAGR because they are the ones who drive the growth of the market. The more number of bigger players, which contribute to almost 46% of the Indian pharma market, if their CAGR is higher, it means that the overall pharma market CAGR will improve. However, if you look at as the ranking goes down between 21 to 50 rank, the number of players with a CAGR greater than the than the Indian pharma market CAGR, the number has come down slightly. Also, if I look at the smaller players, okay, between 500 to 700, Samarth, Troika, KLM, Viatris, these are the players which have a CAGR better than the Indian pharma market CAGR. As the base of the company is smaller, it so happens that growing at a faster rate probably is easier, provided you're focused. We are also seeing for the Goliaths. In their earlier stages, they were focused on the acute segment, on the generic business, focusing more on affordability and GPCP segment, and gradually they moved to the chronic segment. Probably majority of the companies in this, except certain companies like Eli Lilly, which is a MNC and will focus only on the chronic segment, but majority of the Indian companies falling in this segment are there in that scenario, in that phase where they focus on the acute segment, the GPCP segment, and they make their brand stronger over there. Now, over here, we have focused only on companies with turnover greater than 100 crores because this is more or less, I mean, if this is 85% of the market, this is another 11% of the market. So almost 97% of the market gets covered by these companies. So we focused only on these companies. Then we also try to look at the Davids. Now, we had looked in the earlier slides. Davids have really given good brands. In our comparison or understanding of David and Goliath, we were thinking about David's as small players and not so strong with the and absolute regional focus. Yes, that is true because when your scale of operation is small, you may not want to go pan India. Here we have taken examples of few smaller companies. There are many more good performing companies, but we have taken an example of few smaller companies which have a CAGR which is greater than the CAGR of the Indian pharma market. Their multiplier, 3-year multiplier, we have taken multiplier of Feb 25 over Feb 23. Their multiplier is also better than the IPM multiplier. And we have looked at their strengths. You will see typically the companies are having strengths in a few geographies. A company like Unison, it is present only in West Zone, probably only in Gujarat to a great extent. Whereas a company like Lloyd would be stronger in South Zone. Ozone overseas relatively stronger in North Zone, followed by East Zone for Ozone, and overseas it is West Zone. So if you see majority of these Goliaths, Davids or smaller companies, they focus on limited number of zones and also the therapies in which they are present. Okay, they do not have pan therapy presence. They have presence in a few key therapy areas and they build strong brands in the key therapy areas. So our perceptions about Davids now changes while core facts don't change. It's like they just stay the same. They are high turnover, major contributors, strong access, presence in all therapies. Whereas what we talked about Davids, also that same thing remains. They are companies which are moderate to low in terms of turnover, minor contributors, strong across limited zones, and presented limited therapy areas. But then, as we look at the type of brands that they have built, the type of strength they have across zones, the type of leadership they have in certain therapy areas, and probably in terms of absolute value, their market share may be less. But because they are affordable and economical for the industry, in terms of unit consumption, they may be much bigger players. And also, when we talk about unit consumption, they are much bigger players. Also, in terms of affordability, they also provide affordable options to the market. Now, to summarize, the Indian pharma sector continues to be a significant, to be a promising sector in the Indian growth story. As the players in the arena multiply, they create a positive environment, while major players focus on all rounded growth in terms of therapy, sector, and geography presence. The small players play a selective approach. Both, however, show a strong market performance. Investments in healthcare, changing population demographics, and access to healthcare will continue to drive the growth of the market in the coming years. Now, IPM Diaries is an initiative from Pharma that focuses on the strategic areas that drive exponential growth in the Indian pharma market. Now, this is our fifth episode. Before this, we have had five topics: the power of mother brands, strategic partnerships, evolution of lifestyle diseases, and growth levers in the Indian healthcare industry, all looking towards how it impacts the Indian pharma market or drives the growth of the Indian pharma market. If you haven't had access to any of these episodes, please feel to reach out to us. About Pharma it is a first of its kind commerce to insights technology company solving core trade problems. We have tech-led products catering to the needs of the pharma brands, chemists, distributors, and manufacturers, providing them a level playing field to scale, trade, and grow their business. Anchored and powered by leading Indian pharma companies to strengthen trade in India, PharmaRack is India's largest business-to-business commerce platform across categories. Our core offerings are Farm Analytics platform, wherein this IPM Diaries is a part of this offering, where we focus on analytics and insights on sales, marketing, supply chain, and supply chain uniquely driven through on-platform and off-platform data capture. Farm Connect Stockist platform, which strengthens the distributor operations, gives a two-way visibility and returns management. And Farm Retail Chemist platform, which has the best-in-class features for company to retailer engagement and loyalty building. To know more, please visit our website. And this research paper has been brought to you by this team. And besides the team members, Sheetal, Pari, Richa, Shipra, we have the entire PharmaRack data analytics and field team who have supported in data collection, projections, and delivery. Thank you so much, and feel free to write to us for your feedback on this current episode and any suggestions on the new topics that we can be taking for the further episodes. I hope you found this episode of IPM Diaries very useful. Thank you so much for joining us today.